Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast. I think we're up to episode 4 now, and we've got a few interesting things. We're going to go through a $1,000 PC build from both Steve and I. We both have not discussed these builds beforehand, so we're going to go component by component and see which one's the winner. I think that my system came out better, but anyway, you can decide. We're also going to talk a little bit about Starfield and Nvidia drivers, things like that, improving performance. We've got Power Color 7600 XT related stuff as well, whether or not that product is real or not, we'll talk a little bit about. And yeah, just very cool, chill vibes this episode. Not much has been happening, so we take it a bit easy and just have some fun. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. So let's get into it. Well, Steve, I have too many monitors. Before I came on the podcast, I was cleaning up some monitors. Once I finished with monitors, testing them, I put them in this big pile over on the ground. I was putting them away back into the boxes, and I'm running out of space. I got like 50 of them here at the moment. Which, would you agree, there's probably too many monitors?
It's probably about 40 too many, I reckon. 10's a good number.
10. Yeah, I mean, how many do I use for my desk setup? I've got like 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I reckon 10. 10 probably makes sense. So yeah, too many. Anyway, how are you going?
Pretty good. I'm still recovering. The last few days I've been very fatigued. I guess that's sort of the trailing effects of having influenza. So bit struggling for energy, bit of a headache today, but I'm happy to do the podcast and catch up with you. It's certainly nothing like it was a week or two ago, so I'm very happy to be on the mend and doing quite well and able to enjoy work and do all that sort of stuff. But yeah, hopefully in about another week we'll be fighting fit and back to normal.
Yeah, fingers crossed. You sound a bit better than last week, so that's good.
Yeah, every day's a little bit better.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's unfortunately it's been unfortunately it's been good weather at the moment. So unfortunately, haven't been able to go out and do as much stuff. It was, I had to make this room like super dark where it's actually beautiful outside right now. But anyway, we'll get on to the rest of the podcast. Actually, one thing I did want to talk to you quickly before we get into these news things is I watched your video yesterday, which I think probably is 2 days old now when this video comes out. But anyway, on the 7800 XT versus 4070. And I found the pricing thing at the end pretty interesting. I hadn't really looked into too much the pricing of these parts in other regions. And it seems like in Australia, the 4070 is like gotten discounted or something. Like you was quoting prices around like 900 Aussie, which is well below $600 US when converted. So
yeah, it's a bit
surprising.
Odd. I'm not sure what's going on there because normally in Australia, at least historically, I've thought that we pay quite a heavy Nvidia tax. And usually the Radeon GPUs are fairly in line with the US MSRP. So yeah, not exactly sure what's going on there, but it wasn't a situation where there was like, one particularly cheap RTX 4070. There was quite a few models from various retailers available at that price, like 890 Australian dollars. And yeah, 7800 XT at about $10 less, 880. I think it's still probably for most people going to be the better value buy, but you could certainly go either way. There's a case to be made for going either way, whereas I think when there's $100 US gap between them, it makes it very difficult to justify buying an RTX 4070.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. I mean, like 880 Australian dollars, once you remove the tax that's quoted in our prices here, is the equivalent to around $530 US dollars, which means that the 7800 XT, the 7800 XT is slightly too expensive. And it means that the 4070 is quite a bit discounted here, which again is, as I said, quite an interesting sort of price cap. So I have to keep monitoring that one and sort of see how these launch prices go in other regions because it's not the sort of $100 US price cap that we were seeing previously.
Yeah, I'd have to go have a look at historic pricing in Australia because I vaguely remember them being up around $1,100, maybe $1,200, but I don't pay as much attention to the Australian pricing, so I can't remember what RTX 4070s were, 3, 4, 5 months ago.
Now, today we will be doing some $1,000 PC builds a bit later on, but there's a few news topics to talk about first. Just a couple of brief ones I want to touch on. So the first one, obviously we've done a lot of Starfield testing lately, and one of the news topics from this week is the new Starfield driver. So NVIDIA's released a second game-ready driver. So they already released the first game-ready driver about a week before the game was released, even in the early access period. So they were certainly very prepared with the driver, but they've released a second one, which now enables ReBAR by default in the game which does provide what they're claiming is around a 5% performance improvement on average across their products. And it seems like a lot of people have been testing it, finding good results and things like that. It does bring up a couple of questions, but have you done any testing of this so far? Are you planning on going back and looking at the new driver?
Yeah, when the driver was first released, I thought, oh, this is a good opportunity to do a bit of an updated test, do some things that we wanted to get done but didn't get done due to time in the original content. So I did start to test. I only did the RTX 4090, and I found, I think, upwards of about 13% gains, but as little as 5%, depending on the resolution and the quality settings, whether it was medium, high, or ultra. So there's definitely a performance uplift to be had there. But yeah, I did the 4090, and then we had a few other content pieces that we were working on that had been delayed or I wanted to get done. I thought, you know what, I'm not going to go all in on Starfield again. Like, I think mentally I probably couldn't do another round of Starfield anyway. So I was trying to talk myself into it by maybe doing just like, half a dozen to a dozen GeForce GPUs of varying performance tiers and generations. And in the end, I thought, nah, I'm just not going to do it. If there's another major update in the next month or so, maybe we'll revisit it with a dedicated content piece there. But otherwise, it'll just be in the, the CPU and GPU content that we're inevitably going to do.
I think that's fair enough. I mean, they're planning a whole range of upgrades for the PC version over time. They've sort of come out and said, all those things that you guys were complaining about our game not having, that it definitely should have had at launch, like HDR and FOV sliders and all this basic stuff. Well, we're definitely going to add that in at some point. So hopefully there's going to be a point in like a couple of months where they've added in all these crucial features that definitely should have been there. And then we can go back and have another look at it and maybe, do some updated testing and things. It is surprising, though, that the driver essentially enables ReBAR via a profile. Now, NVIDIA drivers, generally speaking, they sort of operate on a whitelist basis. So most games will have ReBAR disabled by default. And then if NVIDIA decides that they want to give you ReBAR, then they will enable that via the driver profile. And you can go in and use the NVIDIA profile inspector and enable it yourself, which some people have done. There's a couple of weird things here. First of all, why wasn't ReBAR enabled in the original Game Ready driver? Which makes you wonder how much Game Ready testing was actually being done there. And should they just be enabling ReBAR by default in games at this point?
Yeah, ReBAR. Man, that one caused us some headaches early on and still sort of does to this day. Should they enable it by default? I don't think so. It definitely needs a proper investigation, obviously, by NVIDIA, hopefully ahead of time so they can work out whether it's detrimental to performance or not. Because recently I was having issues with, I'm pretty sure it was Forza Horizon. No, it was Horizon Zero Dawn, maybe Spider-Man. I did a dedicated video on this, but for those that aren't up to speed with what I'm talking about, basically I was getting much lower performance with GeForce GPUs than some GeForce owners were reporting in a select few games. And it was because I was testing on a platform that automatically enabled resizable bar. And in those particular games, the GeForce drivers were left to, I suppose, an auto setting or on. And when on, ReBAR was really hurting performance, like lowering FPS by, I think it was 20, 30, up to 40% in some instances, like very massive declines in performance because ReBAR was enabled. Whereas some other people who'd been testing those games with GeForce GPUs had been doing so on a system that had ReBAR disabled. So there's a couple of levels to enabling / disabling ReBAR. So I suppose level one that turns it on, but it may not necessarily be on depending what the driver's doing, is obviously resizable bar on in the driver, in the BIOS. And if it's turned off in the BIOS, then it's just off. Doesn't matter what the driver wants, whether it wants it on or off or whatever, it's just off. So if you have a motherboard that defaults to off and you don't manually turn it on, then under all conditions, resizable bar is off. So in games where resizable bar hurts performance, you're not going to see that problem. There was all that hoo-ha about whether or not we should test with resizable bar a few years ago. We eventually decided to change over knowing that it was going to cause some headaches, which it absolutely has done. So now we test with it on by default, and then it's up to the driver to work out whether or not it's enabled. And, you said NVIDIA has a whitelist, and that's what they claimed from day one. We tested, I want to say, about 30 games on day one and found that for at least about half a dozen of them, performance did go backwards. So in those instances, you would think that they would be blacklisted and it would not be turned on there. Anyway,
bit of a weird one.
Bit of a weird one, but yeah, because it can have such a massive impact on performance, I don't think it should be on by default. It should be something that is looked into and worked out. But yeah, Horizon Zero Dawn, that game had been out for ages and had ReBAR had been creating all kinds of performance-related headaches there, and it was over a year before that actually got addressed. And it's a game that's commonly benchmarked with.
I would have thought that as part of like the game ready process, as they go through and they implement all their profile optimizations, that definitely assessing whether ReBAR is beneficial or detrimental is something that they would be going through and testing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like there's some things that have slipped through the cracks. Obviously, Horizon Zero Dawn in the negative sense, it should have been disabled. And then Starfield, where it probably should have been enabled from the beginning and probably would have made a bit of a difference in some of those benchmark charts. Like everyone's benchmark Starfield at this point that has, typically speaking, AMD performing a bit better than we'd normally see.
Yeah, a lot better, I'd say.
Yeah, now we're seeing, Nvidia could be getting an extra 5 to 10%. How much did you say? Like 13%, up to 13%?
Yeah, I saw an instance of around 13%. At the high end, I think minimum uplift was 5%. But again, I'd only tested the 4090. So yeah, you're going to see different results on different generations of products and different tiers of products. But yeah.
Yeah, I think they missed a trick a little bit there. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. Another thing I wanted to touch on, bit of a rumor. Great that we have a podcast now that we can talk about this stuff, which is great.
Yeah, we never discuss rumors, do we?
Yeah, so I saw a topic on video cards about a supposed AMD Radeon RX 7600 XT featuring supposedly 10 or 12 gigabyte memory configurations. And this comes from a power color filing to the EEC. So that's one of those, regulatory bodies where you have to submit your products saying we meet all the relevant standards and stuff. It sounds like Power Color has submitted these cards. Now, having analyzed a little bit of where I would think a 7600 XT would fit into the lineup, I think that this product doesn't exist. I think we'll run through a few things in a moment. I think it wouldn't make any sense for them to release this product. So my guess is that Power Color is just preemptively submitting some names of products so that it makes it a little easier for them in the future in case AMD does suddenly come out and make a product like this. But just from, I don't have any inside sources. I'm sure that you can say what you know as well, but we don't have any inside information that there's like a 7600 XT just around the corner. This sounds a bit BS. How do you sort of see it just initially?
Yeah, well, it could be anything, but it does seem like it's probably not happening anytime soon just because we've heard nothing, and we usually get information on this sort of stuff. We sort of catch wind of it few members well in advance. So yeah, it's unlikely to be coming in the next few months, but anything's possible. But yeah, I don't know if I want to say it's BS. It's unlikely. I cannot confirm nor deny, basically.
Well, let's run through some of the stuff to why that I am reasonably comfortable calling it BS. And the reason that I have is that now you look at the market. 7600 is priced at $270. 7700 XT is $450. There's obviously a nice hole in the middle around $350-ish US dollars to fit in some sort of product. And ideally they would have that. The issue though is that the RX 7600 is the full Navi 33 die. So it uses all of I think it's 32 compute units for that die.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a monolithic die, I suppose you would say.
Yeah, so that's a fully enabled version of that product. Whereas previously we'd seen, like a 6600 would be a cut down version of the 6600 XT. So there's actually would be room to have the XT model. But with this generation, they haven't done that. They've just gone full all out with the full configuration, which means that if they were to release some sort of 7600 XT, it'd have to be a cut down Navi 32 die in some fashion. They've already cut it down from 60 to 54 compute units with the 7700 XT. And the maximum that we've really seen cut down from AMD's RDNA products has been like Navi 21 was cut down from about 80 to 60 compute units, so about 75% cut down. But that's a fairly sizable reduction. And especially with the chiplet design, there's question marks over how many defective dies would they even get? they could probably all just be 7700 XTs. So by the time you're starting to look at like, could they cut it down to 46 compute units or something like that, which would be a 75%-ish cut down, you're talking about a pretty sizable reduction, could still be expensive to manufacture. And yeah, I just don't really see that being a super compelling product. Like they'd have to price it quite low, around sort of that $350 mark, could be too expensive to make. Just doesn't sound like a product that would really, like surely they wouldn't cut down their second highest die right down to the level of a $350 product. Just doesn't sound right to me.
Would they go with another custom die, another die for that specific product? I seriously doubt it. It wouldn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Like that would make more sense for like a 7700 XT type product. But yeah, they went with the chiplet design there.
Yeah, I think they sort of could have been a bit hamstrung with they kind of needed to make the 7600 a full Navi 33 die for it to be the level of performance that it needed to be.
Yep.
Like already at launch, it wasn't a super compelling product. So at least at its MSRP. So if they'd cut that down further to enable a 7600 XT, it just wouldn't have worked out super well at all. And of course, there's plenty of RDNA 2 silicon available at $350. So there's not really the need for the product anyway. Like you could just buy a 6700 XT around that price, offers pretty compelling performance. It's already got 12 gigabytes of memory, so you're not exactly being left behind with like 8 gig of memory. It's still there.
Yeah, and if anything, they can reduce that gap as well. Like the 7700 XT will no doubt find its way down towards $400.
I imagine that will start happening quite soon, given the sort of sales discrepancies that we're seeing between the higher end model and the 7700 XT. The 7800 XT is like good demand. Yeah, the 7700 XT not so much, at least. Yeah, based on what we've heard. Yeah, interesting one. I think that the AMD lineup will probably mostly remain as is for now. They might do like a 50 XT, I don't know, something in the future, overclock them or something. But yeah, there just doesn't seem like there's that flexibility with their lineup and configurations this generation to do much more than what they've done, which again, yeah, probably should focus on, just improving things like a 7700 XT and getting the launch price right and things like that. But we covered that last podcast. With not much news happening this week, I thought it would be a bit of fun to go through and we'll build a theoretical, we haven't actually built it physically, but a $1,000 PC build. See what can we do at the moment for $1,000 US. So I have built a system on PC Part Picker, and I know you have as well, and we have not discussed this at all before coming on this podcast. And I'm very interested to see which of these systems will end up being better, because I've done some min-maxing, let's say.
Really? Well, I went for very boring, predictable. I think you could quite comfortably guess what I've gone with, the configuration I've selected. I think it's a pretty good system. But yeah, also Tim hit me with this morning while I was wrapping up another video. So I didn't, I went with the obvious option because it was already there and everything. I didn't have a lot of time to do some research and see what other deals were going on. But that aside, I'm confident that my system will blow Tim's system out of the water.
Okay. That'll be interesting. So just on this, obviously $1,000 budget here as sort of the setup, not $1,001. So it has to be under $1,000, because obviously there's always that creep thing that can come in like, oh, I could put in an extra part. It's only $1,005. Nope. Hard limit, no peripherals or Windows price or monitors included in this price either. So it's just effectively building a new tower PC. And even though I've done a little bit of min-maxing, I'm still sort of thinking a little bit about like, a realistic system someone would buy. So, for example, I probably wouldn't be building a system with a dead-end platform at the moment. It's probably not a recommended path.
Shots fired at 5800X3D owners there.
5800X3D is a great upgrade if you've already got an AM4 system.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense to buy it now, though. As a brand new system, it doesn't make sense. It's a great upgrade option.
We'll go part by part. I guess we'll probably start with the CPU, which I'm guessing we've chosen the same CPU. So I'm just putting that out there to begin with. What CPU did you end up going with?
Well, there's really only a few options from Intel and really one option from AMD. And the 7500F isn't available yet, so I went with the 7600, Ryzen 5 7600.
Yes, I did as well.
Okay, so what was that, 220 for you?
220 in my PC part picker list here. So that's a reasonable chunk of the budget there. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point, you probably would be buying an AM5 system.
Well, as expected, Tim and I are both AMD fanboys, AMD shills. We've both gone down the AMD path, so surprise, surprise. But no, I agree. AM5 should have some good legs in it. I think for a system like this, it just makes sense because you get that upgrade path, and if you get like a couple of years from now an equivalent 5800X 3D that you can drop into this very system, that's going to serve you quite well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the Intel options around this price, usually you've got like your F model Core i5s and things like that, which are well priced. Like I think the 13400F right now is about $200 US. So it's a little cheaper than the 7600. And obviously you can get similar motherboard and memory prices and things like that. So you could save a little bit of money going Intel, but I just, you've got the 14th gen upgrade there. The rumors are sort of suggesting that's not going to be a huge upgrade path for people. And I just feel like if I was personally building a new system and I wasn't going like extreme min-max, I was never going to upgrade this system, that I do want the ability to upgrade to Zen 5. Especially like I would imagine a 7600 to like a Zen 5 X3D part is going to be a fairly substantial performance improvement.
I would have thought so, yeah. And also, while the Ryzen 5 7600 is more expensive than, say, a 13400F, it's also faster for gaming and stuff like that. So I think it's the better buy.
Yeah, and obviously being a 6-core part as well, we don't really need 8 cores. The whole core debate, this processor does have the overall performance to run modern games. We've seen, titles like Starfield and so forth, the sort of, they do use a fair bit of CPU resources, but a 6-core is still fine. And even with the comments around things like Cyberpunk 2077 supposedly maxing out 8 cores, depends what sort of 8-core we're talking about. Do they mean a 3700X, which is a lot slower than a 7600, things like that? That remains to be seen. So I still think that a lot of people, especially buying in this $1,000 range, will be very happy with just a 6-core processor, and certainly gives you a lot more room for the GPU. Now, I am also guessing that we've chosen the same motherboard, but I'm interested to hear.
I'd be surprised if we have.
Okay, what did you end up going with?
I went with the ASRock B650M Pro RS, and I reckon you probably went with the HDV based on my recommendation.
Yes, I did. I looked at your video. I went on this morning. I was like, Steve's got a great B650 video where you've tested 35 boards. Which one does he say is the best cheap board? Because I really need a cheap board once I put the GPU in. I'm like, wow, okay, don't have much left. So yes, I went with the HDV. You went with the Pro RS. So you're the motherboard man. Who's made the right choice here?
Well, they're both good boards that work well, but the Pro RS just has a few extra features, and I came in a little bit under budget. And I've always advocated for, if you've got a little bit more money, spend a little bit more on your motherboard, because we're both recommending or building this system for its longevity, its future upgrades. So if you are planning on keeping it for 3, 4, 5 years and you want to slot a new CPU years down the track from now, having a slightly better motherboard with a few extra features can be beneficial. Off the top of my head, I don't know really how much better the Pro RS is than the HDV. You'd have to compare them side by side, but I know it's got a few extra things and it's a little bit better. I believe you get like 4 memory slots, whereas you only get 2 on the HDV. Slightly better cooling, slightly better performance. It's not night and day different, but what was your board? What did it cost? 125, I would have guessed.
Yes, 125 US. Yes. So how much more was the Pro RS?
Well, 140. I think it's probably
$15 more.
I think it's well and truly worth the $15. I think again, we'd have to compare them side by side.
I think the two DIMM slots is probably the most limiting factor there, which is sort of there's sort of always the discussion, should you go like 16 gig or 32 gig of memory? If you do go with like a 2x8 gig configuration on that board, you're obviously going to be very limited in your upgrade paths. You're going to have to swap out the entire memory kit to go with 32 gig, which is obviously an issue there. I mean, it still does have some reasonable features. Like it does have 2.5 gig LAN, which is handy if that's your sort of thing. A few USB ports, but obviously it lacks premium features. Like there's no Wi-Fi. It's only got a couple of M.2 slots, micro ATX, so it's not got a heap of expansion or anything like that. So if you were going to upgrade to like a workstation type build in the future, like you're going to swap out the 7600 for like a 7950X, it's not really suited to that sort of platform. So yeah, Ideally, if I had a bit more budget, I would have pushed up to a slightly more premium motherboard with a few extra features, but I couldn't afford to do that at all because my system is pretty much bang on the $1,000 mark.
Yeah, no, the board you've gone with is very good. Like, it's questionable whether mine's worth the upgrade, but yeah, just the dim slots and a few extra things like you talked about. But yeah, I could fit it in my budget, so why the hell not?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So the GPU, this is why my system has been min-maxed, is that I have put into my system a Radeon RX 6800
Ooh,
at
okay.
16 gigs. So the XFX Speedster Swift, it's SWFT.
Yep. The Swift. No, that's a well-known one.
319.
Yep.
So it's $430 at the moment, which I think is a pretty good price. What GPU did you end up getting for your system?
I spent $320 on the Power Color 6700 XT, so slight downgrade compared to you. So I'm interested to see what compromises you made for that to happen. Did you just go with the box CPU cooler, did you?
I might have. So you probably got a much better cooler there.
I managed to pick up the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Black Edition for $25 on sale. Normally $50.
Yeah. You see, I've kind of made a few errors there because I think if I was actually building this system, I would choose something like that.
Yeah, the box cooler is not good with the 7600. But having said that, I would rather have an RX 6800 and then spend an extra $25 later on to get the box cooler. To get the upgraded Cooler Master cooler to replace the box cooler. So I would argue that you've gone. What about your storage? What storage do you have, Tim?
Well, we'll talk about storage in a moment because I wanted to talk about.
Well, actually, no. I want to talk about. I'm taking over here, Tim. Memory. What memory? Because that's it. That's an important one given the CPU that we're using here.
Okay, so you want me to reveal the memory?
I'd love you to.
It's not that bad. I was looking at pricing and I saw that 32 gig makes a lot more sense than 16 gig.
Yep.
You don't save that much, and the 16 gig kits, so like the 2x8 gig stuff, often has much worse like memory frequencies and timings and stuff. It's a lot of like DDR5 4800 type stuff. So I've gone with a 32 gig 2x16 gig kit of DDR5 6000 CL36 memory from Patriot, which was priced at $80 US on Newegg. So that's really like I was trying to save as much money as possible there. I would probably buy CL30 normally because it's only a little bit more expensive.
I think it was $25 more, which absolutely you should get. But I've done virtually exactly what you have done. You know, DDR5 6000, mine's CL38, but mine could be lower latency. I don't know what the secondary and timings and all that are, but I've essentially gone for the same memory at the same price as you. Mine's Team Group T-Create Expert 32 gigabyte kit. So we've done basically the same thing there.
I would have thought that, we'd probably get something pretty similar. Again, like 16 gig. And even for gaming, like I think these days we would probably be recommending 32 gig over 16 gig for gaming at the moment, especially.
Absolutely. I don't go 16, not on a new computer. No, don't do it.
And again, like I've gone with the ASRock B650M HDV, which means that if I had gone 16 gig, no upgrade path, can't add more in because it's only got 2 DIMM slots.
No, you'd have to sell it and get another kit.
Yeah, pretty much. So I think the memory there, it's okay. Back on the GPU though, when I was looking at the research for this, Nvidia just has nothing. Like I was obviously considering the 6700 XT as well, and there are just no Nvidia products that I could justify putting into this $1,000 system.
Yeah, I mean that's been the case with Nvidia for years now. To be perfectly honest, they've just not been interested in competing down at the low end. No peasant class GPUs for us. They just don't. They're not interested.
I mean, the new options are obviously the 4060 Ti in this sort of price class, or the 4060 if you sort of more down around $300.
Yeah, which are like $400 plus.
So you just wouldn't buy a 4060 Ti. And even the old stuff, like I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting? Like I was predicting that you would pick an AMD GPU. So I was kind of thinking like,
naturally,
wouldn't it be fun to put an Nvidia GPU in this just for a bit of fun? But even then I'm like, I can't justify like a 3070 in this sort of system.
I didn't even look because I know that they're just not an option. 6700 XTs are better buy than the 3070. I mean, it depends on what price the 3070 is, I suppose.
I think they're about $380, sort of the cheapest ones new on places like Newegg, which is pretty expensive.
So I don't, have you already told me, what did your 6800 XT, your 6800 cost?
$430.
Yeah, okay. So that's $110 more than mine. I wonder if that actually turns out to be good value or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and so like the cost per frame level versus the 6700 XT.
That card will age well, though.
Yeah, I mean, 16 gigabytes of memory is obviously a key selling point here. And I think all of our discussions about VRAM in the past has sort of led us to not really want to be spending $400 on a GPU that has got only 8 gigabytes of memory, which is sort of the last generation Nvidia options. It's a little disappointing to miss out on things like AV1 encoding. Whether or not I'd use that is questionable. DLSS as well, especially as I'd probably be using a system like this for 1440p gaming. And I've sort of said in the past that at least I believe DLSS is quite a bit better for 1440p than FSR.
In this budget, what are you going to do? Like, your option's an RX 7600, which is a pretty garbage product next to a 6700 XT.
Yeah, that's right. If you go new, and then obviously the Nvidia products, you're sort of tossing up, well, I get DLSS, but then I've only got 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which is sort of already going to, as you've proven in many videos now, that sort of is going to be a problem for some sort of configurations.
Especially if you're building a computer today. I mean, if you're getting an 8 gigabyte graphics card for less than $200, then that's fine. But if you're paying,
of course,
you're paying $400 or even $300, pretty rough.
Yeah, and I think that's why we've started to see some price movement and price cuts for some of these GPUs, like the 4070 coming down a bit more from 600. I think.
Yeah, 550. There's one available at so.
Yeah, the 4060 Ti's come down a bit.
Yeah, we'll see if we get more dropping down to that price and if they hold there. But yeah, that's definitely a better price. I mean, we always sort of said that card should be more like $500 in today's market.
Obviously, the 16 gig thing was very funny to see that, right now, obviously, you can go on Newegg and there's quite a few models actually available at $450 for the 4060 Ti 16 gig. And at the launch of the product, Nvidia was like, it definitely costs $100 more to give you 16 gigabytes of VRAM because of, the extra PCB requirements and traces. And obviously we had to go with the clamshell design of the memory configuration stuff. So that's very expensive, guys. Like,
yeah, they're very adamant about
$100 more.
Yeah, that didn't last too long, did it? So, look, in Nvidia, to their credit, they're probably losing $50 every sale.
Yeah, the margins on those cards, they're really crying as they get dropped from like a 60% margin to a 55% margin or whatever the math would turn out to be.
They're getting rolled. Well, it's not a 5,000% margin, so they're not happy with that. Why would you? Why would you be?
Yeah, I think Nvidia has got a bit of work to do to convince people in that $300 and $400 price tier, and it's probably why AMD is sort of thinking about not releasing high-end products next year and just focusing on this price range, because obviously they've got some success to some degree in this price range. They've got options that people are buying and are willing to buy. Shall we move on to the rest of the build? Because obviously if I've spent $110 more on my GPU, I've made some sacrifices.
Yeah, well, you've saved $25 on the cooler and you've saved $15 on the motherboard. So you're a $40 saving on those two parts. But yeah, there's obviously what's the situation here, Tim? Are you only able to install one game at a time? What's going on?
Yeah, pretty much. So the SSD I've chosen is the Samsung 970 Evo Plus. I really wanted to get the 1 terabyte version in here. I definitely would recommend people to buy the 1 terabyte version, but doing so put me over budget. So I've got the 500 gig version, which is only $30.
Yeah, okay. That's
quite affordable.
Yeah, not a good buy by any stretch of the imagination, but also better than what I thought you were gonna come up with there. I thought we might be looking at a 128 or 256 gigabyte drive if they're even still available these days.
No. So the issue I had was like, again, I want to make this as realistic as possible with still doing a bit of min-maxing to get that GPU in there. 500 gig is not great. Like, you definitely ideally would not have a 500 gig boot drive, but you can install more storage. It's easier to upgrade than some other parts. So there's that. The other thing was that the Samsung 970 Evo does have DRAM. So if you were to use it as a boot drive, it will be a little more performant than if you got the DRAM-less drives that often a lot of the super budget stuff. So that was a consideration. And again, sometimes when you go to like the super, like 128 gig super cheap $10 SSDs, you're sort of not only sacrificing capacity, but you're sacrificing your DRAM cache as well. And then often they won't even give you like good quality NAND either. You'll be like on QLC or something, which is super slow. So this drive will give you performance, so you will be able to use it as a Windows boot drive. It just doesn't give you any capacity at all. So you'll install Windows and Starfield or something, and that's it. So what did you end up going with for your SSD? I imagine it's a lot better.
Well, it's certainly bigger. Because we don't do a whole lot of, well, let's be honest, we do no SSD content at Hardware Unboxed, so we're not storage experts. There doesn't seem to be a lot going on in the storage industry for the most part. But I went with the Crucial P3 1 terabyte drive, which, how much did you say yours cost?
$30.
Okay, so I spent a whole $14 more to double the capacity over you.
A normal buyer is definitely making that choice.
Yeah, I think the P3 is a decent boot drive. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's a decent one. Yeah.
I hadn't like you say, we don't really do SSD testing on the channel. I'm shocked at how cheap these drives are. Like 1 terabyte for, you said you spent $14 more, so the price must be like $45.
$44, yeah,
for 1 terabyte of SSD storage. Like that's a couple of years ago, that was like hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, I think these days 2 terabytes is sort of the sweet spot. But over the last year, DRAM and NAND pricing has just fallen off a cliff. So that's part of what I covered in my why building a new PC now is actually a pretty good time to do it, because there are, a lot of the other components are at an all-time low, at least for the life cycle of those particular components. So yeah, storage cheap, memory cheap.
We complain about GPU prices, but I've put an RX 6800 in this and it was only $430, which I think's okay.
It's a 3-year-old product though.
It is.
So it's the oldest product basically in there.
It is. It launched at $580, so I guess it sort of has come down in price, but not as much as like SSDs and stuff.
I've gone with a cheaper GPU than you, and it's by far my most expensive component, and it's also, I believe, the oldest component in my system.
A bit of an indictment on the market, isn't it, that we're building a new PC in 2023, and both of us have chosen 3-year-old GPUs, which are still available and are very well priced, and there doesn't seem to be any like run out on them. Like there's still plenty of them. So
yeah, it's because the new ones suck. Let's be honest.
The new ones suck.
They value for money. They suck.
So obviously, I've had to cut down on my case as well.
Well, so have I. Yeah, so have I.
So I chose the cheapest case that you could possibly get on PC Part Picker, the Thermaltake. I know absolutely nothing about this case. Thermaltake Versa H17. It's a micro ATX case. So thankfully, my motherboard is a micro ATX motherboard. Otherwise, I would have been totally screwed here.
Yep.
It costs $40. The GPU I checked just fits with like a centimeter of space, theoretically. Okay. But it seems like a very basic product.
Well, you've done a bit more due diligence than I have. We ended up spending the same amount of money. So, yeah, my case is technically $70, but we did allow mail-in rebates, didn't we? And
yes. Yep.
Mine has a mail-in rebate of $30. So, that brings
so what did you
down
get?
To 40. I got, and you'll be familiar with this case because I know I was, the Magnum Gear Neo V2. It actually looks pretty good.
First of all, definitely I've heard of that case. No, I definitely have never heard of even that brand. I guess maybe I'm just out of touch because I'm not a case reviewer.
Well, we're definitely out of touch on the case front. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, the Neo 2 looks, the Neo V2 looks pretty good. Certainly, I think a good buy for $40 after that mail-in rebate, which you'll probably get back in about 2 years' time.
Yeah. So does it come with any fans installed in the case?
I'm sure it comes with all the fans.
All the fans populated.
I know nothing about this case.
Let's move on then, so we don't embarrass ourselves.
A bit like you, it filled. It was at the right price point. No idea about fans. Maybe 2 in the front. I'm going to say 2 in the front. That feels good. That
feels good. I know mine only has 1 in the rear, so yeah, for cooling, maybe not great. I don't think it would pass the Gamers Nexus cooling standards all that well because it's got like a largely closed off front panel.
Yeah, we're going more down the Buildzoid kind of path there.
Cook the components.
Well, he just puts them on the motherboard box or whatever. He's a bit old school like that. I like it.
Yeah, I was thinking of that because if I could put the components on the motherboard box and call that a case, then I save $40 and I could have upgraded at least the storage to 1 terabyte, which would have been much more sensible.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that's kind of cheating. It's kind of cheating the test. So I thought I'm not going to do that. That's kind of not great. So I did go with the case. And at least for me personally, I would probably spend more money on a case. I know it's an easy way to just cut the budget significantly because premium cases, they cost like $100, $150 for something that's reasonable. I probably wouldn't buy a micro ATX case just because if you do upgrade in the future to a different motherboard and you want to do like an ATX board upgrade, because a lot of the more premium boards are ATX, then you have to do then a case upgrade as well. Mm-hmm. So that's generally the reason why I wouldn't buy something like that. I typically go with sort of the mid-tower style thing, nothing super large, more airflow oriented. So this is definitely not a case that I would buy for my system, but it is very cheap.
Yeah,
so,
a lot of people like micro ATX because it fits in their desk or they're set up well, and there's generally a reasonable amount of micro ATX options. And just I did a quick bit of research for you, Tim. My case does come with a pair of 120 millimeter fans, so I was right with my assumption. Yes, I was correct. There's two in the front.
That's pretty good. So given that it was only $40, if I'd done more research, I probably should have put that case in instead of the case that I put in.
Well, it's got dual tempered glass.
Tempered glass?
It's got sandblasted aluminium sort of wrapped around it to give it a nice finish. It's quite a nice case. It weighs in at 8 kilograms. It's got 7 expansion slots. It's got everything, mate. I reckon this is the case. I think I've won this just through the case.
I mean, the fact that it comes with one more fan than my system and tempered glass, my one just has one of those very basic, like metal, normal side panels that usually is on the back of the case, but this is on both sides. I think your case is probably definitely the winner there, but again, maybe should have done more research. But this leaves the power supply, which I only had $75 left to use on the power supply. So we're talking low tier stuff. I went with the EVGA 700BR, which is a 700 watt, 80 plus bronze certified power supply from EVGA. Okay. So I didn't go with the
sounds all right.
Didn't go no name brand. It's not obviously super 80 plus certified. Bronze is still okay. I'm not a power supply reviewer, so people will be furiously typing comments about how I know nothing about them down below. But
you're misleading people for sure right now.
Yeah, a quick Google search that took me all of 1 minute led me to believe that this is a low-end / budget power supply.
Sounds right.
So again, I probably could have gone with something a bit more premium and higher up in the PSU tier list, but it's EVGA. They're a reputable company.
Yeah, well, I've clearly come out head and shoulders above you on this one because mine is gold certified. And that is a big deal, I'm sure. It is fully modular, and I've got an extra 50 watts to play with. So 80 plus gold certified. It is the Corsair RM750E. It's the 2023 model. So it's got the facelift, all the new features.
That's a much better power supply.
$100. I think maybe it probably is. I don't know. We don't cover power supplies, but I think for $100 that's a good deal.
I would probably buy that over. Like again, if I was building the system normally and I could stretch the budget a little bit, I probably would use a power supply like that. Again, you're saying it's only $25 more, so again, it seems like a pretty good deal. But yes, this EVGA power supply is not modular, so you've got to chuck all your cables in there somewhere. The RM series is a step above, so I think Corsair's got the CM series as sort of their budget equivalent to sort of these EVGA BR series power supplies. So the RM series, again, it's a bit more, I guess, higher tier, so it's probably a bit more efficient. Obviously, the 80 plus stands a bit higher there. And 750 watts, again, I've got a 700 watt power supply, so potentially it's going to give you similar longevity, but again, 50 watts, a little bit better. But we're not power supply reviewers, so I'm just assuming all of this stuff.
Safe to assume, Tim. So in summary, yours will definitely generate a few more frames than mine. It'll be a healthy little uptick there until it burns out. So mine won't burn out. And I can have twice as much RAM, which I'm sure will be important at some point in the future. You'll have to buy a new motherboard. or a new memory kit, and I have twice as much storage, so I can fit like more copies of Starfield on mine than you can.
Yes, and you got a better case as well, although we spent about the same amount of money. So, yeah, I mean, in total, my system cost $999.92. So if I couldn't find a slightly cheaper of anything that I was looking at, this whole system would have fallen apart and I would have had to like revert to a 6750 XT or something like that. So I've just managed to get it under $1,000. Again, though, I would spend $100 more in total on this system to upgrade a variety of the components. So I think just getting that 1 terabyte SSD, slightly better motherboard, slightly better case, slightly better power supply is probably the way to go. So for you, what was your total system cost in the end?
Mine was $969.
Yeah, so I think yours is certainly a more balanced build, should I say? Like there's fewer things that need immediate upgrades in your build.
What I would do if I wasn't as constrained on the budget front, I'd spend an extra $25 to get that CL30 memory because that gives you a nice little boost. It's more when you are CPU limited, but of course, if you're playing esports titles and stuff, you will notice the extra CPU performance there. I'd probably go for like a 2 terabyte version of the drive because I'm sure that's not that much more expensive. It'll be double at most. That's not a big, it's an extra maybe $40, and that's a lot better. I think I'm happy with the case. I might just buy this case, to see how good it is. As for the graphics card, I don't think I'd upgrade that either because I'm not convinced yours is better in terms of cost per frame. I think mine's a really good value option. I think if anything, I would probably go from $320 up to $500, so another $180 to get myself a 7800 XT. And that's about it. So what do we got there? We got $25 on the memory, maybe $40 on the SSD, and then if I wanted to really take it to the next level, $180 on the graphics card. But that's just going a whole different tier of performance. But I think that would probably be worth it because it's not a huge increase. But if you're stretching the budget to get to about $1,000, then
yeah, that's right. I think it's interesting. Obviously, it sounds like you've chosen your GPU based on more of a cost per frame thing, whereas I was just going, what's the best graphics card I can fit into this system, and a bit less concerned about the cost per frame stuff. I do think the 6700 XT is better cost per frame. So if you were going more sort of, I have around $1,000 and I want something that's got good bang for buck value, then certainly your build is more that. It's got more bang for buck components. And especially if you spent that little bit more on some of the components to get the ultimate value sort of things, then that's more in line. Whereas I think for me, you basically have to do everything you said, but also it would make even more sense to upgrade the GPU because going from $430 to $500 on a 7800 XT, it isn't that much more.
No, you would have to do that. The 6800 is it's just not it. I think with my own personal bias, because, I have to be right, I think if you had to live with these systems as they are and you couldn't alter them in any way, mine is the better system.
I agree. Because I think that yours, it's more balanced.
Yeah, well, you have to do less shuffling of data on your primary drive that hopefully you'd be playing games off and not a crappy hard drive.
Well, we can't add a hard drive because we have to keep this build.
Maybe have external drive or something. I don't know. But yeah, so you have to do less shuffling of games. Or just you can install games and not have to delete them and then re-download them. So it's much more practical in that sense. And that's a big one. That can't be overstated how annoying it is not having enough storage. So from that perspective, it's far more practical. It'll be much more quiet because you don't have to rely on the box cooler whizzing away in there.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit more flexibility with the motherboard. But I think it's the cooler and the storage, if you had to live with it day to day, would be the things that you would regret most.
Yes, and if I was going to make a case for my system as to why it is best, my one will perform better day one because of the 6800 versus the 6700 XT. It's not going to be worlds different. Obviously, it is a faster GPU. I think it's about 20% faster, maybe. But CPU performance is obviously going to be identical. Memory capacity is identical as well between our systems. So we're not going to be running into stuttering issues because I've accidentally gone with a super low CPU or anything like that. Yeah, my system does have the better out-of-the-box performance. But I think if I was going to choose these systems again, we couldn't upgrade them or anything, I would choose your build. But my build is better if you have $1,000 right now, you want the best performance, and you're going to worry about upgrading all the stuff that I accidentally sacrificed later, like SSD and stuff, then my one would have, more room for that while being good now. But yeah, again, I typically don't build my systems like this. I always like doing the min-max thing because I know that some builders do this where they will prioritize GPU and then just cut everything else down as low as possible. I think like my very first gaming PC that I built was something that was basically that. Like how good can I get the GPU, and then I'm just gonna figure out everything else later. But normally I wouldn't do that.
Well, yeah, it's not, your strategy's not terrible, to be honest. Based on my 15 game average at 1440p, your GPU ended up being 26% faster.
Okay.
And, that puts the cost per frame of mine only a little bit ahead. Not terrible. And the 7800 XT offers the exact same cost per frame. You just get a bit more performance for a bit more money. And then the newer features like AV1, which I talked about, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that I'm probably skimping a little bit on the build, and I'd probably still take some of your advice about upgrading the components, potentially the GPU as well. Now that we know it's a bit more sort of similar-ish cost per frame, I still think the 7800 XT does have some additional benefits like AV1 encoding and things like it's slightly more power efficient, or is it similar in power efficiency? I'm not sure. Maybe that doesn't count.
But yeah, the nearest thing from Nvidia right now, because you can kind of ignore the RTX 3070 at $400 because you can get the 4060 Ti for that. Well, the 4060 Ti is a smidgen slower, but more power efficient, new features, all that sort of stuff, frame generation, I suppose. Yeah. So, but that's, you're looking at quite an increase in the cost per frame over something like what we've picked, or a 700 XT.
All right. Well, those are our $1,000 PC builds at the moment. You can probably comment and let us know which one you think ended up actually being the better buy overall.
Pretty similar, really.
Yeah, I think if we had a much larger budget, there'd be some different conversations to be had. So maybe we'll do something like that in the future when there's another sort of slower news week and not as much to talk about. We'll choose some sort of different budget and make a PC. But yeah, we all have the same data, right? Like I look at your reviews to choose components for this build. I'm sure you look at your own reviews. So yeah.
It would have been funny if we had picked the exact same thing. That would have not made for the most interesting content, but we were pretty close, but there was a few important changes.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll talk about the other not so interesting things that have been happening in my week and your week. Stuff that's been happening this week. Honestly, not that much. I've been watching a TV show that I want to talk about, but I haven't seen the final episode yet. And I think whether or not I like the final episode will determine whether I bother talking about it and recommending it to people. Because it does sort of hinge on, everything's building up to the last episode. We'll see what happens there. So I'll come back and talk about that next week. This week, I wanted to talk about the fact that I upgraded my phone and I bought the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold, not Z Fold, Z Fold 5. So the new folding phone from Samsung, which was ludicrously expensive. Like most people probably wouldn't buy a folding phone, and I thought that I would try it out. So the reason why I wanted to buy a folding phone was not just because I saw Linus using one. It's because when I'm in my house, which is separate to this studio, so my studio's got all my like PC gear and stuff. When I'm in my house, sometimes I want to use a computer. I have to bring out my laptop, and I don't really like using my laptop, and there's nothing I really need a laptop for. Like I'm not editing videos on a laptop in the house. I'm not putting documents together or looking at spreadsheets and stuff. Usually I'm just like browsing the web, or maybe I need to do some like internet banking or something, or like I'm just, watching a YouTube video or watching sports or something while I'm doing something else. And my laptop, it just felt like it's kind of this pointless device. Like it's big, it's cumbersome, its battery life isn't amazing. It is still like, it's an Asus ZenBook, so it's a reasonably performant laptop. It's portable, things like that. But I just found myself not really using it that much, but still wanting more screen real estate from my phone, so that, let's say I'm sitting on the couch and you've messaged me something that's like a graph or something. You're like, does this product look good? And I'm sort of, I don't want to run back to the studio and run numbers. I can have on my phone screen side by side your message and a calculator or other research, and have that side by side, which is not great on just a normal phone form factor. So I bought a folding phone and I quite like it. Honestly, it's kind of a weird form factor where it's got this like thin front bezel. I'm sort of showing this to the camera, but you don't need this context. But it's like thinner than a normal phone at the front. But then obviously you can open it up to the full big form factor.
Okay.
So yeah, there's obviously a few drawbacks, like it is thicker and heavier than a normal phone. There are some apps that don't work super well with this sort of folding thing, like some apps won't automatically change size or don't allow resizing, which kind of doesn't work super well. But given that this is like the 5th generation phone from Samsung, it works surprisingly well. There's a lot of good software features in it for doing side-by-side apps. It's very polished. It's not the vast majority of apps that I use do support things like side-by-side apps or switching formats and things like that, which I guess wouldn't have been the case if I bought a first-gen version. So yeah, so far it's been a success. The downside was it did cost like 2,500 Australian dollars, which is a ludicrous amount to spend on a phone. I got like a few pre-order bonuses, like trade-in bonuses and things like that, which made it a little cheaper in the actual price that I paid. But still, it's an expensive phone. Like phone should not cost 2,500 Australian dollars. So that's
No.
I've had it for about a month now. So I thought I'll wait until I've got a few more like impressions of using it before I talk about it. But yeah, I quite like it. It's been a good upgrade, I think.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think I paid just over $2,000 for the S23 Ultra when I ordered that. It's I think 1 terabyte version, and I've been happy with that.
So you got more storage. I think I got the 512 gig version because I don't really use tons of phone storage.
Sure, I'm not using it anywhere near it, but
hey, tax write-off.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, so just for context, I upgraded from a Galaxy S20 Plus, I think, not the Ultra, but the Plus. So my phone was about, what are they up to now? The S24. So I believe it's like 4 generations old. So it is faster. It's got a higher refresh rate screen, or I think the previous one was 120 hertz, but couldn't turn down the refresh rate in some applications, so the battery life wasn't as good. The battery life is surprisingly good despite having a big screen. So it's similar to my S20 at launch. So obviously the battery is degraded over a few years, so battery life is better now, but similar to the launch of a different form factor phone when it came out, I think it's a win for me. And yeah, I just find myself using the features. So sort of a good experiment. I thought if I don't like it, I'll just swap it out for something else. I'll return it with Samsung, get something different. But no, I think I keep it. I think it's been good. Okay. What's been happening in your week?
What's been happening in my week? Obviously just been working, doing that sort of stuff. When I haven't been working, mostly just dad-related stuff. So
dad stuff?
Yeah, dad stuff. Had to play a bit of basketball this week, so it was good to get a bit of exercise in. Can't say I'm quite there yet, but as I said, I'm getting better. I'm not as sick as I was. So, but yeah, just a bit of shortness of breath and stuff like that from having influenza. Otherwise, nothing too crazy. I haven't worked at all on the custom monitor mount thing for my desk. So that project's been on pause for 2 weeks now. Hopefully I'll be able to get back into that next week. But I've just been catching up on work, to be honest. We've had that much on over the last little bit. So we got Q&A week coming up before too long. So that'll be probably the week where I finish that off, get it all done.
No, it's been a pretty quiet week. I mean, like just generally, most of the stuff that we're expecting to be released this year has been released. Now, there'll probably be some Intel CPUs 14th gen, but again, we sort of talked about how it's not going to be that exciting, I wouldn't have thought. Not that I know what the products are at this point, but we're expecting it to just be a refresh. We're not really expecting any other GPUs, I would have thought. There's probably the opportunity for an Nvidia to do like a 4050 and AMD to produce a lower end GPU, but doesn't seem like that's in the pipeline necessarily. So it seems like the rest of the year is just mostly going to be, there's a lot of game launches. Obviously, we've got like Cyberpunk 2.0 version with Phantom Liberty coming up at the end of this month that we're sort of having to think about what we're going to do for testing there. And then plenty of other games as well. New Assassin's Creed, there's like Alan Wake 2. I think there's another Ubisoft game I'm forgetting. A couple of like bigger, potentially graphically intensive, GPU intensive titles to test. It's mostly about gaming, I would have thought, the rest of this year. And obviously just the typical end of year, like best product updates and things like that. So yeah, a bit different to some previous years where there's sort of been that bulk of stuff that's coming up in like a November or something like that. Doesn't seem like we're getting that this year, which I think will be a bit cruisier.
Yeah, it might be nice, to be honest. Might be nice. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I know there's a few things coming up, but yeah, they're more like, AMD Threadripper type stuff and nothing that's...
Of course, Threadripper. I'm forgetting like FSR3 as well, which is still yet to launch, which will be something I'll have to cover.
FSR3 probably, maybe, could be potentially coming this year.
Well, they said it would come this fall or whatever in the US, but knowing AMD, I mean, that could mean anything. It doesn't, like, I haven't got any information about it, so it doesn't sound like it's coming like imminently. So it's not like I'll be testing it right now, which again is probably why it wasn't in a game like Starfield. But again, get this out, guys. Seriously, it's been like a year since you announced it.
I suspect you'll have to cover DLSS 4 before you get to FSR 3.
Possibly. Well, there's a new DLSS version to test before it for sure, because obviously DLSS 3.5 is coming out very soon. So I will almost certainly be testing that first, which is, I don't know, interesting. But yeah, that's sort of the things I have to sort of think about. But yeah, hopefully a bit of a cruisier end of the year, get out more in the garden and stuff. I have a few more garden updates on the things I've been planting and things like that as they start sprouting and all that. So we'll give some updates there. Nothing to report now. Still just got dirt. So...
Well, I mean, still having dirt is good. It'd be a concern if your dirt had gone missing. So I'm glad you still have all the dirt.
No dirt thieves in my neighborhood, which is good. There's probably a few other things they could steal that aren't the dirt. So there's that. But so probably is going to wrap up this podcast. As I said, not too much has been happening in the news, but over the journey, we'll be doing a few other interesting topics. We'll have maybe some like listener mail type episodes are sort of more Q&A like, and obviously we'll try to get some guests on at some point as well. So a variety of things for the Hardware Unboxed podcast. But for now, that's it for this one. If you do want to subscribe to the Hardware Unboxed podcast channel to get this in your inbox every week, then please consider doing that. We're also on all your favorite audio platforms if you're not already listening through there. So if you want to Apple Podcasts it or Spotify or I don't know what other apps people use.
The other ones.
The other ones, there's like 500 of them. So, anyway, get on it. That's pretty much it, though. It's been good to chat.
Has been. Always enjoy it.
Yeah, and we'll be back in the next one. So thanks, everyone, for watching, and see you in the next one.